So, Jonas, take it away.
Thank you very much, Fabian. So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in at Dansk IT.
Yeah.
Fifth floor or fourth floor, something like that. So, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how cash is dying, and maybe some of the lessons that we can learn from that. That would, I would say, apply to many of the other technologies that are popping up now, like AI, for instance, or robotization, stuff like that. Then also I will talk a little bit about the future of money that has, I think, some interesting opportunities both for society, banks, people in general, but also for consultants. So just to start off, just a short, that did not work.
Now it does.
Now it does?
Yeah.
Excellent. So a little bit of brief background from me there. So I'm working at the Department of Digitalization at CBS. It was used to call IT management, and before that it was informatics. So we are the core supplier of IT people, well, yeah, in Denmark, or from CBS at least. We changed name last year to Department of Digitalization to reflect some of the what we think really important trends in society and in business. And in doing that, so my research in that area is about cashless society, transformation of money and the financial sector broadly. I had done previously some studies on basically the consequences of when we move to electronic payments, like using debit cards instead of cash. What are the consequences? We will spend more money. That's sad for us as consumers, but good for the merchants. I also studied more, say, of the infrastructure behind the financial sector, and in particular focusing on open API in the financial sector, which is, say, a hot topic with the Payment Service Directive 2. Then also I'm involved in a fairly recent project called Business to Business Platforms. You have a link there to the project. It's a collaboration between CBS, Danish DI, Danish Industry Association, and we have a consultancy firm helping us in developing a interface between Danish firms and global online marketplaces such as Amazon, Alibaba, and whatever. And then I also have a new small passion that I would like to explore, and that is esports broadly. And I do like that we are the #1 ranked Counter-Strike Go team. And the coach of the team is actually one of my students as well. So that is my topics, and so it involves digitalization broadly across industries and facets, or yeah, this private part. So over to the structure and the key message of my webinar here today. So money is, I would say, one of the key trust systems ever created, and it's probably one of the key innovations by man historically. So that is one of the messages. The second one is that the emergence of a cashless society is not based on one single event or a political decision. Instead, it's a result of a numerous of innovations over a very, very long time. And I think we should have that in mind when thinking about new technologies and how they are diffused and adopted in society. And then the final point relates back to the future of money. It's a little bit uncertain, of course. We don't know anything about the future, but we assume from our view that money will become smart, and I will come back to what smart is, or say at least programmable. So we can put some logic, or we could call it intelligence, into the money that we use. So one of the questions that has, say, gotten my attention is basically, what is money? Of course, there are official definitions of what money is. It's a unit of account, should be accepted, used as a payment and stuff like that. But when I'm thinking, so why, even though I don't actually use cash, so we have the wonderful Danish banknotes and coins. So my thing is, why do we use this? Because there is no actual value, except we know and hope and expect that the central bank can print more so they won't go in bankruptcy. So in my view, I think that it is a trust system, and the only reason that I am using cash is that I know that, for instance, that Fabian will accept it and be able to use it tomorrow. And that, I think, is a fundamental core of a trust system, that you trust that it can be used tomorrow. And the reason that is we left so we have today what we call a fiat currency. There's no physical backup. Historically, we had gold or silver or copper as a backup for the banknotes that we used and cash. So we're moving to this, what I think, this trust system. And we should remember that it is a trust system and the most important trust system that we have. It is the fuel that drives economy. The creation of a trust system takes time. And that is the first part of my presentation here. And by the way, if any one of you have any comments or a clarifying question, you may interrupt along the way. So, and I will mainly draw upon my learnings from my studies that I have done in Sweden, which are in a way more advanced in this regard than Denmark or the rest of the world. So in a study that we have conducted in Sweden, we have identified the 24th of March 2023 as the death or the arrival of a cashless society. So cash was invented back in 1661. I will come back to how and why that happened. Now, with cashless society, we don't refer to a society where there is no cash whatsoever. It is when cash is not generally accepted as a mean of payment among merchants. So basically when it's of no practical use. And that number is basically when 5% of the transaction in a society are done, below 5% of the transaction in a society are cash, or below that, then it's a cash-free society, because it will be more expensive for the merchants to accept cash than accepting it. So what happened? So this story of 350-year almost, year story, what happened? So we have to go back to the first payment, I would say the greatest payment innovation ever, and that's the banknote. This is a picture of the Swedish first, say, paper-based dollar back from 1661. It has basically the same future as cash today. There were cash in other countries before, in China, but they didn't have the same kind of features that we acknowledge or that cash would have today. And so this is, I think, the starting point of the journey towards a cashless society with the birth of cash. And as any great solution, it has to solve a problem, and that we are all aware of, that great IT innovations are addressing a serious problem. And the problem was that Sweden at that time, or prior to 1661, were dependent on the copper dollar. The copper dollar is a coin. The problem with this is it weighs about 18.9 kilos. It is roughly this size, and it was kind of cumbersome to trade with. And the reason why Sweden had copper dollar was that we had run out of silver, because Sweden had been around in Europe for 30 years, raping and plundering, basically. We were just a few years before that, we were outside Copenhagen, probably in Frederiksberg, with our cannons trying to, and we took Skåne, basically. So that is the story. So Sweden had this problem with the copper dollar. So a bank called Stockholm Banco invented this idea of a banknote. However, which is kind of funny and interesting, the bank also very soon started to print more cash than they had backup for. So they created one of the first Swedish financial crises. So remember that when banks are printing too much money, there will be a financial crisis at some stage. So the Swedish king, he had to step in and take over the bank, and then he used Stockholm Banco to create the first central bank. So this is what I view like an institutional innovation. And what is really interesting is that the Swedish Riksbank is celebrating their 350 years anniversary. I think it's this month or even this weekend, something like that. So now we have the time of, say, the cashless time of the world. Interesting also is that the central bank in Sweden, or Riksbanken, was not really allowed to print any more cash for 150 years, basically. So over the next, say, 150 years from, or 250 years, from basically end of 1600s until late 1800s, there was a proliferation of different banknotes, or basically each bank was allowed and did print their own cash. We also had a bank union between Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, so we had the same currency that ended about 1870s. So in Sweden, at least, in 1904, there was a law, which I call a legal innovation here, where they had a centralization of issuing of cash. And I think this is and this was about the same time it happened in Denmark as well, and across the western part of the world, England, United States, most places did kind of a centralization of issuing of cash around the 1900s. And this is kind of really important to remember, because so we have this split of central bank money, which is referred to legal tender, and commercial bank money. That are all the money that you have deposited at your bank. And the commercial bank money have a slightly higher risk because they can, say, disappear. That's why we have those laws from EU to protect savings money and stuff like that. And this is an utterly important change in the history of cash. Then we had fairly early in Sweden in 1959, we got the first, say, payment card schema. They were a little bit earlier in the States, but Sweden was kind of early to adopt it. So already in 1959, we had a payment card schema in Sweden. And then this is the first, say, commercial pictures of payment card in Sweden. Then we had something when moves on to the digitalization of money. And that happened in the 60s. I don't know exactly when the first accounts were transformed into becoming digital. It was before 1967, I know that, but the exact time and where we don't know yet, but I'm trying to figure out. So if anyone knows when the first accounts in the world were digitalized, I would love to know that. So this happened sometime in the 60s, this transformation where banks started to digitalize accounts. And just for fun, I have my first bank book. It's from 1965, so you can guess my age based on that. It was given to me from my grandfather, and you can see the deposits and some interest, and it hasn't been used in 1973. Still have it at home. I don't know if I'm going to go to the bank, see if there are any money on that. Then another one happened very close to here in Copenhagen was the ATM machines. And I think that is the first sign of self-service in the banking industry. I think that is an utterly important thing that has huge implications for how the adoption of internet banking and similar things. And what you see here is a picture from Stortorget in Malmö, just across the water here. And they opened the first ATM machine that was linked to a digital account. There were ATM machines before that, both in the UK and United States, but they were not linked to a digital account. So I view this as the first real ATM machine. I took this picture from a newspaper. I tried to get a picture of the real place physically, but they were renovating the facade, so I couldn't take a nice picture of it. So behind the white Mercedes there was the first ATM in the world. Then moving on, basically 3 decades, we have what I view more as technical innovations, the first internet banks. And this is the demo page of SEB Bank in Sweden. It was launched 94 2004, I think. And the name there, I got the picture from Lars Alvinsson, a good friend. He was part of developing that internet bank. And what was really interesting that period in Sweden was a really dramatic adoption of internet bank, and all the expectations were surpassed tenfold. SEB assumed there would be 10,000 customers the first year. They had 100,000. And within only 400 days, all Swedish major banks had an internet bank, in some sense. And I think this is kind of the driver of a lot of the changes that were going on in the bank and killing off bank offices or branch offices in Sweden. But I will come back to that. Then something interesting happened that is kind of puzzling. And it's another, I would say, an institutional innovation or legal innovation, is that the Swedish Riksbank in the years between 2002 and 2004 made a law, or there was a law where they outsourced the printing and distribution of money. So the Swedish Riksbank said that cash is not our core business. I think that is utterly strange, but it's an important signal to the banks. So if the Riksbank doesn't believe that cash is of their core business, so why should we care about cash? Then there was something interesting or sad also in a sense, is that during this time period of 1990s until 2010, there were numerous of robberies in Sweden. It started off with taxi, buses, cash depots, banks, postal offices. And the peak of all those robberies was in 2007. And this picture of this helicopter was used to land on the top of G4S cash depot in Västberga, and then blew the roof, climbed down, stole the money, and flew away. And at the peak around 2008-9, there was an armed robbery each other day in the area of Stockholm. So it was a massive amount of robberies. So employees, and in particular the unions around Sweden for bank employees, public transportation, similar, got irritated. So the unions in Sweden have been applauding the cashless movement because of basically protection of the members. So that I would think is a very, very unique factor in a Swedish context compared to other countries, that the unions promote a cashless society. Then the Swedish government enforced some new rules. We have something similar here in Denmark. They are called RUT and ROT in Sweden. It's basically an ability for you as a private person to make tax deduction if you have home services, you fix your house or renovate, something like that. And that killed off a large part of the need of black money. So historically, we used to pay the people from the eastern part of Europe in cash, and they fixed the house or whatever they did. But with these deductions, it became a white economy instead. Then also something, this is also a sad, but in a way also a funny story. A consequence of the Riksbank's outsourcing of cash, 3 private actors were responsible for the cash management or cash distribution system in Sweden, and one of them was Panaxia. And they probably did a decent job until the top management team took basically all the cash and left the country. So it's kind of funny, but it's sad because there was basically no insurances covering the merchant that lost the money. So this created, say, a negative view on cash. Then we have another innovation that killed off part of the cash use. The Danish version is much better, that is mobile pay. So we have Swish in Sweden. Swish is used for person-to-person payments basically only. To some extent, some merchant payment, but not as advanced as mobile pay. But it solved the issue of paying coffee at your kids' sports games, selling used materials and goods and that. So this is kind of the really start of the death of cash in Sweden, where we don't need any small pocket change to make small purchases. So here's a picture of how the cash situation is in Sweden today. So this is the cash depot, or the remainder of the cash depot in Malmö. And there's no other cash depot south of Gothenburg, and it's teared down. And then you might get a little bit puzzled that since Sweden changed its banknotes over the past 2 years, basically. We got brand new, lovely banknotes that basically no one is using, no one has seen. The coins, nobody really knows how they look like any longer. And you might wonder, why did they change the banknotes? Well, the process of changing banknotes takes basically 10 years. And they started doing that in 2017. And the decision was taken in 2007. And that was the year of peak of cash in Sweden. And if we think more exactly, we think the peak of cash in Sweden was the 21st of December 2007. And since then, it has been, dying utterly fast. So on the next slide, I'm going to show basic how dramatic this change has been in Sweden. So it's from the central bank, this diagram. So in Sweden, the blue line here shows the nominal value of cash in Sweden, and the orange or yellowish line there, reddish line, shows cash circulation in relationship to gross domestic product. So in Sweden, we have roughly 50 billion Swedish crowns in circulation. We can compare that to Denmark, that has roughly 120 billion Danish crowns in circulation. Then also remember, the Swedish crown is basically not worth anything, so the amount of cash is extremely low. And if you compare this as a percentage, Denmark is around somewhere like 3% of in relationship to gross domestic product. And this is probably the only country where we can see this dramatic decline in cash. The only country that has been at a similar level as Sweden was Iceland before the financial crisis. They have more cash today because people, were kind of, had some issues following the years of 2007. So what we did there in Sweden just over the past year is we did a study to identify this date of 24th of March. We surveyed about 800 Swedish merchants. We brought in some secondary data. We brought in and did also some interviews. And basically what we did a calculation of the cost of accepting cash and the revenues from cash sales. And that led us to this date of 24th of March, 1661. No, 2023, sorry for that. And so we know that in a sense that people have stopped using cash, merchants in Sweden have stopped accepting cash. That is legal in Sweden compared to Denmark. So when you enter a store in Sweden and see this sign, we don't accept cash, you have entered a contract with that store. So contract law in Sweden has a higher superiority than banking law. So the Danish banking law from 1984, which stipulates that merchants have to accept cash, has a higher value than contract law. So, but then we should remember it's not just a thing that happened suddenly. So based on the story, we have a lot of legal innovations, payment innovations, I would say also monetary innovation, financial innovation, institutional innovation, technological and social innovation that collectively shapes this process towards the cashless society. These events are unique for Sweden. There are similarities to what is going on in the rest of the world, in Denmark or in Europe. We have the same kind of payment innovation with payment cards. We have a lot of the similar technical innovation, but maybe not particularly the legal innovations are not the same in every context. So when doing speculation or estimation of what will happen to other countries, one has to consider all these factors. And I think one should remember these multiple types of innovations are also important for the adoption of any new technology, and it will take time. So even though there is a lot of hype from all kinds of consultancy firms that try to sell AI, robotization and stuff like that, it will take some time before it hits us. So that is my same message. It takes time for major changes to occur. So what happens now? In Sweden, the response has been from the Swedish Riksbank is to propose an e-krona, which is cash but in a digital form. We have asked the Danish National Bank. They don't have a clue what it is, what it can be used for, and why they should have it. But we can see in Canada, England, Russia, Ecuador, and a number of other countries are looking into digital cash issued by the central bank. It might have some really interesting implication that I might return if anyone is interested in the discussion afterwards. So, but then the concept, so what can one use digital cash? And one of our ideas is that we can make cash smart, and that is smart money. So smart money is something that we define as something value-based instrument based on some computer protocol, which facilitates and enforces the condition for its appropriation as a payment. Basically, it will have the same functionality as cash. It can be implemented in different ways. It can be say, token-based, so you will transfer it physically in a sense, or digitally at least, or it can be an account-based centralized solution as well. How the Swedish central bank will implement it is uncertain yet, but I think we will see the first announcement of its existence this year, just to celebrate their 350 years anniversary. So what are the smartness that we can put on smart money? So we can control what can be purchased, so which type of products, who can use the money, who can purchase, what time something can be purchased, where, location basically, whom can be the payer. That could be interesting to know, at least for some Danish banks, to know who is the payer of the money, and why something can purchase. So you can put different conditions. So, so we have this, remember, we need to have this history of the evolution of money. So we have the physical money with its features, we have electronic representations on our account, and now we have smart money or programmable money. So how could that, in a sense, be implemented in the commercial banking environment? So I have had some talks with some of the Danish banks, and so basically, can that be implemented in today's banking infrastructure? Do we need a new infrastructure? So on this slide here, you see a part of a SWIFT message. And on, for instance, on the row 32A there, you see the value. That's the amount of money you're going to transfer. And you have all kinds of information. So one could envision that you were to enforce a new row called 32B, where you can put different conditions when the money can be used. So this is it's feasible and practical to implement. Whether banks will do it or not, that's another question. So it can be done, but it can also be done by, for instance, the central bank. So I will now show you a few different scenarios where smart money can be potentially used. So we have a situation here. I have kids, and also Fabian have kids. We are loving, caring parents. We want to do the best for our kids. So we want them to eat healthy food. But we know kids might have desires of other things. So with smart money, we could send the money to our kids, but they can only buy the healthy stuff. We can discuss whether it's useful or stuff like that, but it's possible. Another case or scenario that we think would be quite interesting, is also already implemented to some extent in some countries, is the context of welfare money, social welfare money. In Australia, for instance, they have special credit cards that people that receives welfare money can only buy certain types of products in certain types of stores. So in this way, we could prohibit that social beneficiary people that could be unemployed or whatever it is, that they can't spend the money, for instance, on things that we feel or believe is undesirable, drugs, criminal betting, whatever it might be. And so they are forced to buy, for instance, the children clothing that they receive the money for, instead of going on a travel. Another possibility is that with traceable money in this sense, or smart money, we can probably reduce money laundering or corruption. I made this presentation for a group of people from the South Americas and also from Africa. And the idea of having, say, an open ledger of how the government is using its money they thought it was wonderful, because then they can control the government. And that would most likely, hopefully, reduce the corruption in society. Another more, say, current, very local example or context where this could be useful is in anti-money laundering. So if a bank knows where the money comes from, then they should be more easily able to stop transaction with those money. Another one that is kind of interesting is that we can envision a real-time taxation. Instead of having these fixed tax periods where you do the reporting, all the taxations, for instance, with VAT, whatever, can be done in real time. And that will, of course, lead to a decrease in administrative burden on the firm. So, and then the final questions before getting to the end here is that, so who could create smart money? As we see it, is basically central banks. It would be very interesting if every one of us would have an account with the central bank. It will create some new interesting tensions between the central bank and the commercial banks. I believe that the commercial bank as such would be able to create these types of money. And they can relatively easily implement it in their current infrastructure. But also I think that it gives an opportunity for new actors to develop and create smart money. So to wrap up a little bit, so the key message of the presentation is that money is a trust system that has evolved over a number of hundreds of years. The change or the conversion or towards a cashless society is depending on numerous of different types of innovations that will influence this process, and those innovations are utterly important for how they are interpreted in different contexts, in particular the legal innovation a society might do. And I would say the future of money is uncertain, but it's possible that our cash will become smart, or at least programmable in some sense. So I think that wraps up my presentation. So thank you for your attention and questions.
Yeah, so yeah, as Jonas said, first of all, thank you for the presentation. If you have any questions, you can write them in. You can also raise your hands, as I mentioned in the beginning. But if there's no questions right now, so I'll just ask the first one because I have a few. Now you have a specific date for the Swedes when cash will be gone.
Yeah.
How about Denmark? Is Denmark becoming cashless as well? Cashless as well?
I think on a practical level, in say in merchants or among retailers, Denmark is not that far behind Sweden. What we do have an thing in Denmark is the love for the 1,000 crown banknote that no one basically have seen, but it's used for criminals basically. So we can probably see a kind of a large influx and outflux of that in parts of Copenhagen. We also know there's a lot of conversions between, or have been conversions between the Danish crowns to 500 euro banknotes. We had the Nordea story on that topic. So on a practical level, I think Denmark will be very close to Sweden. There's one thing that is an issue for the retailers and merchants in Denmark is that they have to accept cash. We had a small adjustment of the legislation, so some stores in some areas don't have to accept cash between, is it 10 and 6, from 10 o'clock in the night to 6 o'clock in the morning. It poses cost on the merchants and retailers, and considering the use and the transaction volume, is it worth it? What there are also these a legislation, or they say that on Jutland there's a lot of cash, but we did a study here in Denmark basically on cash use, and there's no regional difference between the use of cash between Jutland and Copenhagen. So it's probably just bad mouthing about the Juts. I don't know, something like that. So I think on a practical level, the use of cash will be a few years after Sweden. Whether the Danish legislation will change so merchants and retailers can stop accepting cash, small,
Thank you. Okay, so I have one more question, at least, because as also you wrapped up here, you said that money is a trust system.
Yeah.
Can you maybe give us your thoughts on how blockchain could affect that, or how blockchain could, as a distributed system, address that issue?
I think it's, I think the blockchain is a really fascinating, interesting technology that will have a large impact over the next coming decades. It takes time to evolve. The technology is relatively new, so it's basically 10 years old. So it's in its infinite stages. I think particularly for trust types for identification parts, it has a huge potential because you don't want really to use blockchain where you have to update numerous of different instances of the repositories. So for identification and thereby the trust thing, I think it has a really important role. It would be nice if the new MitID, not NemID, MitID would be based on a blockchain. We have some electronic IDs in Switzerland that are based on blockchain. In the canton of Zug in Switzerland, they have a blockchain-based identification system. So I think the blockchain will be used and is extremely good for creating trust. And we can also see the well-bespoken solution that Maersk and IBM have developed for the global information pipeline. Parts of that, also the key documents in shipping are based on blockchain, but not the transactions because it's too slow. So bill of lading, which is a key document in shipping, showing who owns, the person who has the document owns the products basically. So those key documents are then converted into a blockchain-based solution.
Yes, we actually have a few questions, and also one of were about blockchain in the future, and you answer that. Very well. So I have one here saying, how do you see the future for mobile payments? Will a smartphone still be a key gadget?
Yeah, it has been a lot of hype of mobile payments. I started my journey into the cashless by studying mobile payments. And in particular was a lot of talk about the NFC technology that finally has arrived on our cards and in our phones. I think the mobile phone will be our primarily medium of storing, accessing money. If we don't get, say, embedded chips into our bodies, but as long as we have something, we have this device to be used for communication and interaction, I think it will be the main carrier of our main access points to money, banking, or whatsoever. So I think it will be a key part. The thing that we still have some issues with different standards between the different, say, the two mobile phone manufacturer or operating systems. Denmark has a really strong position within the Apple ecosystem, whereas other parts of the world are more strong on the Samsung side, or the Google side there. So I think the mobile phone will be a key carrier of payments in the future, or then for at least the next 5 years. I don't want to speculate longer than 5 years when it comes to technology. You never know what's going to happen. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, we have more. So if the definition of cashless is that less than 5% commercial transactions are cash, then is the specific date just a prediction of when this condition is reached, or is there another specific event/condition?
So one of the limitations in our study from Sweden there is that so basically we have a diagram. So I will add that maybe to the presentation afterwards, so you can see that diagram basically. I will add that. So it's a prediction basically. However, I think actually the date in Sweden will be much earlier, because we cannot or could not measure network effects. So what has happened since we did our study in Sweden is that Åhléns, one of the larger chains there, have started to try out cashless stores. They have 3 on test. IKEA is implementing in some of the warehouses in Sweden as well, cashless. So I think actually the date when cash is of practically no use will be much earlier in 2023. So if you plan to go to Sweden within, so don't bring any Swedish cash, because you have an issue of getting rid of it. Stores and restaurants don't accept it quite commonly. So I would say on a practical level, already 2020, we will be cashless in Sweden. If nothing exceptional happens, there could be a huge financial crisis that makes people start hamstring money and stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so one more question, which is also one of mine, I would say, is that what will be the biggest risk that society becomes exposed to from introducing smart money?
It depends on how it's implemented and who is in control of it and who is issuing it. I would really like to see, so the issue that we have, for instance, in Sweden, that will come to Denmark, is that sorry for that, when we don't have any cash left or cash is used, then the systemic risk for the payment infrastructure increases. Because now, at least in Denmark, there is a function, you're able to make your payments in cash. When cash goes away, we are totally dependent on commercial bank money. And we know what happened in 2007. We know what happened in Greece a few years ago. So it increases the risk for society in general if we don't have cash. So therefore, I really stress that the central bank, or here the national bank, that they carefully look into this issue and are well prepared and have plans for managing a cashless society. And that is the key reason for the Swedish Riksbank to develop e-krona is basically to reduce the systemic risk of the payment infrastructure, because that is one of their key tasks. Then also, in my view, the Swedish central bank has a self-perception that they are really innovative. Yeah, they are. They invented the cash 350 years ago. So central banks tend to do their innovations, relatively slowly, but they are viewed in a global perspective very innovative. Whereas the national bank here doesn't really have that, say, legacy of being innovative. So that is a factor we have to take into consideration, basically.
Thank you. So actually, when you talked about the smart money, you said you had a few arguments, which I think is very interesting, because it is something that we discussed on Dansk, this data ethics. Could you maybe address the ethics of having smart money?
Huge implications. Huge implications. So I would say, so there are 2 points here. Today's part of the payment infrastructure, payment systems that we have in every country is paid by the taxpayers. The National Bank gets money to develop a payment system to produce and print, distribute cash. There's my first reflection on why we should not have at least the big banknotes. They are about to disappear now in Denmark as well, due to the Nordea history, basically. So I think it's, and I think they should be implemented on EU level, in particular for the 500 and 200 euro banknotes. I think it's, from a democratic point of view, I think it's disgusting that we use part of the taxpayers' money to support criminal activities by producing their means of exchange. I think that's disgusting. So when it comes to the more ethical with this data-driven society, that the implications of that for the individual, privacy, security issues, I think we have already lost our privacy. We can be traced, people or someone who really wants to know where we are based on where we carry our mobile phone. Of course, the banks, merchants will get more information with smart money. It could give the government more control, but it can also be implemented in a way so we as citizens are able to control the government. And that, I would say, is a very new and unique opportunity, where imagine if you have an open ledger of all public procurements. I think that would be utterly interesting and fascinating. The privacy issue of the data collection, we have the issues with Facebook that are misusing people's data, and their behavior is utterly, in my view, strange in some regards. Just an extra point there, there's this documentary called The Cleaners. It's about the moderators that work for Facebook. It's worth viewing. It's a scary story. Really nice documentary, The Cleaners. It's a German documentary. Really scary thing about how people work on cleaning and moderating Facebook groups. So, and that comes to the ethical issues. And there are ethical issues. So I think there needs to be a serious, well-governed public debate basically on usage of data. What I do think here, we have, even though firms are not really happy with the GDPR, but it in a way increases to some extent the citizens' ability to control their own data. So I think we need to have a very, very serious, insightful discussion on basically what is the future of society and how data should be used. Because this horror example we use or reflect upon is like George Orwell's 1984. And we don't want to end up there. So there are a lot of ethical issues. It is not really my area of specialty about ethical issues or privacy issues, but I think they are really important and should be discussed in the context of money, payments and stuff like that. Not only in the context of Facebook data, but transactions as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just say that we still have time for more questions. So if you want to type in questions, please feel free to do so now. I also want to mention that this is the first webinar in a series of at least 4 within the autumn and winter, which I'll mention in a minute. But I just want to hear you, because every time we have some sort of technology transformation in regards to money, we have, when we introduced Dansk in Denmark, we had people thinking that the world would crash. So how does the Swedes react to this?
Okay. So one explanation that which is unique for, I would say, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, maybe Canada as well, is that we have had governments that are nice, relatively nice. So, and that comes to trust, basically. We trust society to a much higher degree than any other country in the world. And I think that is a key explanation why Swedes are adopting and accepting and don't really care about a cashless society, because we trust the government that they won't screw us. In other countries, they don't trust the government, basically, due to historical reasons, and that is the explanation why Germans still love cash. Is they had a government in the 30s there that screwed them quite badly.
It's more than half of the transactions, right?
So if you just compare, IKEA in Germany started to accept credit cards 2 years ago. Everything before that was done cash.
That's impressive.
Impressive. No? Yes. So I think that we trust the society is something that is utterly important to understand as a contextual factor in this transformation, but it's also something that we should govern carefully, so we don't end up in a situation where we don't trust society any longer. That would be a shame from my point of view.
Okay, thank you. So we have a few minutes left. I'll just want to mention that we have 3 more webinars at least. The next one will be on the 4 types of sharing economies, which is very interesting as well. And then IT challenges in mergers and acquisitions, and then digitalization and disruption. We don't have any more.
All done by my colleagues from my department.
So this is a series of webinars doing as a collaboration with CBS at the Department of Digitalization. We're so excited for having this opportunity. So, and also I just want to mention that you'll get the slides afterwards in a PDF format, and you had some extra you want to add?
I will add something about basically, you can see the curves when this tipping point when we become cashless, basically.
That would be so good. And also we have recorded this webinar, so you'll have a chance to actually watch it afterwards if there's something you want to have re-mentioned. So first of all, thank you to you guys, and thank you for your questions, and also you want to say thank you for your presentation and that you came in here and did a marvelous job today.
Thank you very much, Fabian. It's my pleasure. And please, if there's any additional questions, please contact me afterwards. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.